Welcome to Your Wealthy Self with me, Regina Martinelli. This show is about money and a whole lot more. Here we focus on you being able to expand your capacity for money, success, and abundance and inner wealth. For you to have what's important to you, both inside and out, so you can be your wealthy self. And here we stand in that you can create whatever it is that is important to you, and you can do it without struggle. You can do it with ease and certainty. Today's show is one of those days where we get to be talking about a whole lot more. Today, my guest is Amy Ahlers. I am so excited to have Amy here today. Amy is an expert leadership and life coach for women and a best-selling author. I said best-selling author of Big Fat Lies Women Tell Themselves and the book Reform Your Inner Mean Girl. She has a huge mission to stop us women from self-bullying and being so darn hard on ourselves. This way we can make our greatest and brightest contributions possible. So we are going to welcome Amy.
Hello.
I'm so happy to have you here today.
I am so happy to have myself here so that I get to be with you and all of these beautiful people joining us. And I have to say, listening to your intro, Regina, I felt myself exhale when you said the words that we can do this without struggle. And I was like, oh, right. Isn't that interesting? It just felt my whole system go, let's do this without struggle. So yes, please. And thank you.
Right. Oh, thank you for saying that. It's true. And I'm actually going to be doing a show soon about that piece of struggle and not perceiving the struggle as a threat to like our well-being and our survival, because sometimes we code that on the critter neurology level.
Yep.
And then it has us react in a way versus just being like, oh, this is the universe way of moving something out, moving something in and, flowing with it.
Yes, I love that. And I think that it is so important for us to get how our brains are really wired to look at what's not good, that negativity bias that we have, that, this is that amygdala in our brain, that fear center in our brain was made to protect us. And now, of course, in modern day society, it's also keeping us from our dreams. So I love that you and I are so aligned. I love it.
I do too. So I was so excited about today. Again, which brings me to like those, starting with like the lies that we tell ourselves which our brain reinforces.
Yes.
And then, our RAS starts to select for evidence for that. So can you share those lies that you so beautifully talk about in your book, The Big Fat Lies That Women Tell Ourselves?
Yeah. So, I started framing it as a big fat lie because I was realizing whenever any of my coaching clients, which I've been a coach now for a few decades, and I saw this pattern of like, okay, these really powerful, amazing people. And then somewhere behind the scenes, they're buying into some weird lie about that they're not enough, about that they're failing, about that they're too fat, thin, short, tall, you name it, right? Too sensitive, too fill in the blank. And so for everyone listening right now, if you have any sort of negative emotion going on in your life, I'm just curious, if you ask yourself, what's the lie that I'm believing? What really bubbles up to the surface for you? And that can be a real clue as of what's going on beneath the surface, which of course I know is where you really excel with all of your clients doing that work, right? So, I think one of the most common big fat lie number one is that old, I am not enough, I am not good enough, that big fat lie, which when we think about it, that's what every marketing message is pretty much telling us out in the marketplace is you're not enough, buy this cellulite cream. You are not enough, buy this dress. You are not enough, right? There's that undercurrent coming into our subconscious mind all the time. I don't have enough. I'm not enough. I'm not good enough.
You're so right. And it's so true. And I laugh because I don't have TV and I've been had it for 10 years, but I was at a friend's house and there was a commercial on. And I had to laugh because I wasn't sure if they were selling me the car, the watch, or the woman. And I was like, which one do I get? Do I get all four if I buy one? And it was these lies that kept coming in. But when you step out of the conversation from it, like you're talking about, like interrupting that brain pattern and asking, what's the lie I'm telling myself?
Yeah.
That's such a richness. And most times we don't ask that. We just keep looking for the relief in a different way.
Right. Yes, so true. And it's like instead of having, I'm getting some weird interference. Are you hearing that?
Yeah, I was like, it's
And
almost like
yeah, like it's this is what happens sometimes, by the way. I don't know if this happens often on the show, but when I'm having powerful conversations, especially with other women, and where we are like bringing in some truth, some weird interference comes in. It's like the big fat lies, the inner mean girls, as I like to call it. We're like trying to come in to disrupt this powerful conversation that we're having. So I think we're in the clear right now. So let's ask the technology to just work, please. Okay. We love it when technology works. But yeah, I mean, I think so often we get, blasted by our inner mean girl, that inner critic in our head, shouting all these big fat lies. And then instead of actually doing our inner work, we go to self soothe. We, you know, pick up a drink, pick up a cookie, pick up your phone to start shopping or scrolling through social media, just numbing and numbing and numbing ourselves instead of really doing this important work to actually get to the other side of that belief and get in tune with your truth.
right. And you tell me if you agree with this or not. It's like as much as they're giving us the lie, they're also that we're not enough. They're feeding us the wrong solution. Like they're that
Right.
self-soothing, like, oh, here, buy this pair of shoes.
Right.
Change this particular look, be this particular person. It's like they're saying this is the place to go, just to mask it and shove it down and alter yourself. When we think, hear this a lot, especially when people hit a certain decade in their age, like, oh,
Right.
40s, my best version of myself, or
Yeah.
50s, the next version.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if that version of you, does that invalidate all the other versions? If
Right.
40, 50 is the best version? And then if you do it in another 5 years, is that one better than the previous versions? It's almost like saying a baby who's 6 months who just sits there and drools is the best version as the 1-year-old who can walk, right?
Right. Right. Right.
Or the
Yeah.
kid, is not as good as the cat because it's only in this stage, but when it's more, it can potty train itself.
Right.
There's this we disvalue where we are as a precious version that's just as
Mm.
valid and beautiful as any other version. And yes, we'll continue to grow, but I hear that in what you're saying. Yeah.
I love that. Well, and I think that comes to this other big fat lie, the compare and despair habit that we so have of comparing ourselves, and it's that whole thing of we compare ourselves to other people. And then, of course, social media and all of these other tools just fuel that comparison. But then, interestingly, what you're pointing to, which I think is so powerful, is we compare ourselves to ourselves, the past version. Like I hate it when, the whole thing of like, oh, I'm going to fit back into my pre-pregnancy jeans or whatever, or looking back at that younger version of ourselves in some way. And it's like you said, the preciousness of who we are in this present moment. This is it, y'all. This is all there is. And so how can we instead celebrate who we are in this moment, of course, with gratitude for everything, of course, reaching for dreams as well in the future, but really coming from that place of enoughness right now.
Right. Yes, and there's a thing about, including all of you that I hear in
Mm,
that too,
yeah.
versus, like, only the parts that you like, and then being like, "I'm gonna tolerate these parts I don't, and eventually fit in my jeans when I'm done with that part." It's like we don't
Right.
have to kill that person off when we break up with someone or we stop being, interacting or friends, and we also don't have to kill those pieces of ourselves off,
Yeah.
and holding space for all of it as, "This is the beautiful, messy mosaic of me."
Yes, I love that. And I think, internal family and systems work and parts work can be so powerful. And even, when for the inner mean girl work that I do and the inner critic work that I do, one of the things that I'm always telling my clients and the women in my Rise and Lead program is that your inner critics are just there to protect you. They were born to protect you, even though it can feel like they're beating me up, telling me I'm not enough and comparing me. That how's that protecting me? But really, it's just trying to maintain that status quo, that homeostasis in our brains. And so for us to instead say, I see you. Thank you for trying to protect me, and doing that love translation instead of making all of our inner critics and inner mean girls wrong, we can kind of gather them up like, gathering up kittens in a basket and just love on them. Let them know, I've got this. I don't actually need you to hold me back anymore.
Right. Oh, I love that. Because if you hold them in a basket like kittens, right? And sometimes
Yeah.
kitten scratches a little bit, but they're all playful and lovable and wonderful. But
Yeah.
there's a place where if you turn against that inner critic, I find they either fight back more because they have a purpose
Totally.
and they
Yep.
fulfill their purpose still. And then
Yep.
you're still turning it against a part of yourself.
Yeah.
And it's like that shaming, which your inner critic is still. So now you're shaming your inner critic, and it just kind of compounds it.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I talk a lot in my books and in my work is this process I call the wake up call 3-step process, which is something that you can do anytime you feel like your inner critic or inner mean girl's on the scene where you're beating yourself up for everything that you're not or comparing yourself. And the first step is to actually, and this is like the step where people are like, I don't really want to do that step, Amy. I just want to skip to the second step. I'm like, I know, I get it. And this is an important first step, which is to simply ask, what is my inner mean girl saying? What is my inner critic saying? And actually hand the microphone over to that part of you. Let that part of you have a voice and just hold space like you would, you and I are both moms, Regina, right? So it's like the tantruming 2-year-old. What's the best thing that we can do? Not engage, but just to hold space and know that the tantrum will end eventually. And I know it's embarrassing when it's in public in the supermarket because they want that candy, whatever. But it's like, really just sitting and knowing and trusting this tantrum will end. So turning to your inner mean girl, your inner critic with love and saying, what are you saying? Let me have it. Like, what is it going on? And it's interesting because it's like this crest happens where our inner critic will blast us and then it'll start kind of fading away. And then usually they deliver what I like to call the low blow, like you'll never amount to anything, or you're failing, or you're not enough, or you're too fat, thin, short, tall, or whatever that kind of low blow, big fat lie is. And then stamp their foot and suddenly they've been heard, they've been witnessed, and you go, thank you very much. And then you move on to step 2, which is to then, I like to have people close their eyes as long as they're not operating heavy machinery or flying a helicopter or whatever, but just closing your eyes. And everyone can do this with us right now if they want. Closing our eyes, taking a deep breath, and then asking, what does my inner wisdom know? What does my inner wisdom know? And as I open my eyes here with you, I've asked that question millions of times now in my work, and I'm always blown away by that voice of truth that is inside of us. And I like to call it the inner wisdom. You might call it your inner wise self or wise woman or soul or whatever words work for you. But really going into that voice of truth and letting your voice of truth respond to what that inner mean girl has just said. Because we have that part of us that is so wise, that is always right there, oftentimes whispering to us the truth. And so when we do that and we allow that inner mean girl to rant first and then ask the inner wisdom, the most amazing information comes out. And then the third step, which is a neuro-linguistic programming and NLP technique, is to do a physical gesture to lock it in. So for me, I put my hand on my heart and I repeat back that inner wisdom's truth. So really locking it in. So step 1, what is my inner mean girl saying? Let her rant. Step 2, what does my inner wisdom know? Let that voice of truth respond. And then step 3, lock it in with some sort of physical gesture to start building that neural pathway in your brain to really allow your inner wisdom to be your guide in your life.
Oh, that's so amazing. Thank you for sharing that. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
And it's so powerful and it's so simple, right?
So simple. So simple. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's things that we kind of already do with ourselves. I mean, maybe meaning that like we rant a bit, I'm so angry. And then we're like, and then it's like sometimes we don't really listen for that seed, but we can feel that wisdom kind of roll through us. And then to anchor it, that's such an incredible last step that is needed.
It is. It really is. And I think that, like you were saying, when we start arguing with our inner critics, when we start engaging with them, it really builds up their strength. If we push against something, it's how it works. It pushes back. So instead of pushing against and resisting, just giving your inner critic center stage and recognizing, and this is the key, that's not you. Sure, it's a part of you, but that's not really you.
Mhm.
And as I help my clients really distinguish out what is the inner wisdom, what is the inner critic, what is the inner mean girl, and we start labeling those things, it's incredible. Like it's just, it blows my mind every time. It's just like magic to see what happens when we do these processes and allow our inner critics to have a chance to have a center stage for a minute. And then it's like their power just dissipates. It's fascinating.
Right. It feels like they're actually a strategy from our younger selves. That's
Um,
that's not relevant for our adult self, but it helped us. This is what I see in what I've seen in my work is it's a strategy that we had to implement when we were like 3 years old. We couldn't make sense of the world and things
right.
that were happening,
Yeah.
and we didn't have the abilities, but we're still running it as an adult. And so those things come, and if you stop and listen to it, it almost is silly. Like when you hear your best friend say things like, "Oh, I'm just not this or that, and I'll never have this or that," you
Right.
laugh, going, "I don't see you as that."
Mm-mm.
And it's the same thing with our inner critic and what it is parroting.
Absolutely. I know. Well, it's like we are meaner to ourselves than we would ever be to our quote unquote worst enemy, which I'm sure none of us have a worst enemy, but you get my point. It's like if people could really see how mean we were being to ourselves, they would call the authorities and be like, what is going on with this abuse? But that's the thing, right? Like, I've had the good fortune of speaking on a lot of stages at places like Google and Oracle and Charles Schwab. And I remember when I was doing a talk for women at Google and I was up on that stage, and it was a very interesting experience because they had told me, for these sessions in the women's group, they're not very well attended. And this is a quote unquote soft skill. I was giving my Powerful Women and Self-Bullying keynote. And they were like, there's not going to be a lot of people here. They warned me. And I was like, okay. So I get up on the stage, I start speaking, and slowly the room starts filling and then filling and then filling and then filling. And then all of a sudden it's full and the camera's on me and it's being broadcast, worldwide, whatever. And then I asked the women at Google, I was like, have you ever noticed how no matter how successful or gorgeous or together a woman is, behind the scenes, she's being way too hard on herself? And everyone nodded. Oh yeah, I've noticed that. My friend, this. And I said, but what about you? Are you being too hard on yourself? And all of a sudden everyone's faces just kind of went. And then I had them do an exercise and they vulnerably shared. And then all of these people at Google were coming up to me afterwards with tears saying, I thought I was the only one that worked at Google that felt like a fraud, that felt like an imposter, that felt like I wasn't good enough. And I'm like, look around. Everybody in this room was feeling this way. And it ended up being the most well-attended talk to date at that time. They were blown away. They were like, we didn't think anyone would really be interested in this topic. I'm like, oh, high achieving women, especially. Let's drop the mask here, people, and talk about what's really going on behind the scenes. And that's where the juice is.
Oh, that's so beautiful. So I want to ask you,
Yeah.
why do you think those lies are so tantalizing to us to tell? And for
Yeah.
us to be so hard, why is that so tantalizing for us?
Well, I think that, first of all, it's part of the human experience, right? Like when we look at brain development, the inner critic voice really develops around ages 6 or 7. In that range, kind of up until then, we don't necessarily have that stream of consciousness happening. It's more, and we can see this in our kids, right? They're just in the moment. Like you see the toddler that's like, ah, and then all of a sudden you like hand them their favorite toy or their lovey, and they just like that change on a dime, and they're not having all of this processing happening. And then suddenly things come online and we get that inner critic voice and we get that stream of consciousness going. And then we bring in things like media. We bring in things like, and even if you're a media free household like you are, Regina, you're going out in the world, you're in the supermarket, you're seeing, right? There's no way for us to not be influenced. And all of the media is really actually fueling our inner critics, fueling those big fat lies. So it really is part of the human experience. And I like to say, if I could kill off my inner critics and inner mean girls, I would have done it a long time ago. I've been studying this for decades now. I've written 2 books on the topic. I would have killed them off. But it's not how the human brain works. So instead, we need to learn how to work with it and how to work with the big fat lies and like what to do when our inner critics show up. That's where the work is. Instead of thinking, we're going to exist in the world where we don't have these voices in our heads saying these negative big fat lies to us.
Right. I love it. That's so great. And also when you think about the human form and its design and it's perfectly, so
Yes.
why is there, it's there for a reason. It may have gotten a
Right.
little bit out of balance with
Yes.
today's, like you said, media and all the input
Yes.
we have and how we
Yes.
get marketed to. So then how do we use it in a way that's going to be supportive and to get it, like you said, to a place where
Yeah.
it's manageable or kind of a support system? Because sometimes that inner critic is great when we are really needing it, when we're creating something, we're like, oh, this is off. This doesn't feel right. And that's not good, versus turning against ourselves.
That's right. Well, and I always say, I just don't want people's inner mean girls making their decisions. I want your
Yes.
inner wisdom making the
Yeah.
decision. Using the metaphor of a car, I don't want your inner mean girl being in the driver's seat. I want your inner wisdom in the driver's seat. I want that part of you that knows the truth in the driver's seat. And your inner critics and all of these other parts of ourselves are going to be in the car. It's just how our human experience is. And as one of my clients said to me once, I'm putting her in the trunk. That's it. This inner mean girl's going in the trunk. I'm like, great. But just know that it's part of the human experience, because people think, when I get the job, when I get the car, when I get the house, when I get the boyfriend, girlfriend, wife, husband, kids, whatever it is, then I'm going to finally be happy. This is another one of those big fat lies, the win then game. And it's like, it's not an outside in job. I've seen it. I've seen people who supposedly have it all. And guess what? They're still having to do this inner work. It's an inside out job, not an outside in. Those external things are not going to cure you. Then you're just going to be in the house that you really wanted with still this inner critic now moving on to the next thing they're going to beat yourself up about, right? So, yeah.
Oh, it's so true. Oh my gosh. Thank you, Amy, for sharing your passion with us today. I cannot wait to talk to you more on our next show about your powerful insights you've had and shared with us. And I love the 3 steps. That's incredible. And if you would like to engage with Amy and her work, you can go to amyahlers.com, or she has a free quiz for you to take at freeinnermeangirlquiz.com. I highly recommend it. Her work is incredible. And so we will be, let's see, there's one thing I want to say. Oh yeah. So, just, it's like technology for me, right?
I know, right? I
Um,
know. Yeah.
Yes. So if you got something out of today's show, please share it. There's enough struggle in the world. Let's create more joy, and make sure you tune in next week as we continue to talk to Amy and use all of these gifts and wisdom that she has to help calm the inner critic. I love and adore you. You are incredibly beautiful and a precious being. Please know you are enough just as you are, and we'll see you next time.